Thank you to Eva and Emily for leading us in the shared hymn. I'm Laura Parsons, and I use she, her pronouns. This morning, I will be reading the words of Suzanne Bounds, who coordinated this service, but who is unfortunately ill this morning. Today, we gather on a fifth Sunday to imagine beloved community. Martin Luther King Jr. said that to create beloved community will require a qualitative change in our souls as well as a quantitative change in our lives. 3 members of our First UU Social Action Committee, Mike Brown, Michael Rodriguez Jr., and Monica McNeil, will reflect on what kinds of qualitative and quantitative changes need to occur for the world to shift from violence, fear, estrangement, and fragmentation to one of love, respect, fellowship, and wholeness.
Good morning. I'm Michael Brown, and the title of this message is Imagination. William Wordsworth, the 18th, 19th century British poet, thought that beings know all they need to know about spirituality, nature, and a universal mystery power before they're born. Once born, they begin the process of forgetting, like a lifelong dementia. But occasionally, in what Wordsworth called moments of tranquility, we recall what those important facets of spirituality are. For many of us, childhood itself is a moment of tranquility. And as adults, we fill our children's lives with treasures for their imaginations. We give them tooth fairies, Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, imaginary friends, fairy tales, myths and legends, and on and on. In today's world of advanced technology and audiovisual miracles, we put onto screens all the magic and wonder that's once depended on a colorful oral tradition. And with places like Disney World, children can build their own beloved communities of imagined perfection. Then, one by one, we begin to take those things away from children, replacing them with the hard realities or the virtual realities we feel are needed for adult life. The moments of tranquility become fewer and farther between. Why do we discourage imagination? To test this discouragement, a college professor conducted an experiment. He went into a high school classroom filled with seniors, and he asked, "Who in here can draw me a picture of a horse?" One student, a young girl, held up her hand. He then went to the first grade classroom in the same school district. He asked the first graders, "Who in here can draw me a picture of a horse?" Almost all of the 20 students held up their hands. Faith and imagination was alive and well in the first grade, but it had almost died out by the end of high school. We gradually replaced the moments of tranquility with certain negative imaginations. What will people think? Won't your parents be disappointed? The other kids will make fun of you. You won't be popular. And in today's world, social media magnify all these negative inputs. We wonder why there is a geometric growth in depression, suicide, anorexia, self-loathing, and tendencies toward violence. What happens to destroy the innocence and the beloved communities of childhood? I remember when one of my sons was quite young, perhaps 4 years old, and he walked into the room where I was watching a boxing match on TV. The match was between a very light-skinned white man and a very dark-skinned black man. I asked my son who he thought would win the fight. He replied, "The one in the orange pants." He knew his clothing colors at that age, but he was blind to skin colors as a distinguishing feature. Wouldn't it be marvelous if our beloved communities could be so fair-minded? But how do we begin to achieve such common ground? Laws have not had such a great effect over the last almost 200 years. Organized religions have not done much better. Worldwide, the powers of white privilege and slavery capitalism have done great damage to any hopes of equality. Perhaps we would be better served to start small and then try to build toward bigger things rather than trying to revolutionize the whole world in a cataclysm of conflict. A good example of this idea perhaps lies in the way our society treats children. We remove many childhood moments of tranquility, moments such as, "You'd better go to sleep so Santa can come." "Don't forget to put your tooth under the pillow for the tooth fairy." And, "Did you enjoy the Frozen movie?" These are replaced by comments about the dangers of being in the dark, looking both ways before crossing the street, and not talking to strangers. In the New Testament, the elders tell the children not to talk to Jesus, evidently fearing they will become like him or choose to follow him. Jesus rebukes the elders by saying, "Let the children come to me." And he adds, "Unless you become like the children, you cannot gain salvation." Perhaps becoming more childlike is a simple way for us to start moving toward our own beloved communities. I choose the man in the orange pants.
My fellow UUs are part of my beloved community. I am pagan, a gay man, and I have multiple disabilities, both physical and mental. Though a part of my life is the physical disabilities such as juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, JRAs for short, it is a degenerative disease that destroys all the cartilage in your body's joints. The other physical disability is multiple sclerosis, which affects the short central nervous system, causing my memory problems. I was diagnosed at 2 years old with the JRA and have had 6 artificial joints put in thus far, but may need more work done still. The other disabilities, which are mental, which are a whole different part of my life, is depression, severe anxiety, and another issue which is harder to explain. These qualities of my life run in conjunction with the physical ones, but not always. Since they are treated differently with psychological issues, I only have 2 doctors, a psychiatrist and a psychologist. Being gay is a whole different part of my life because it's difficult to be my natural gay self in the other place outside of the gay community itself. I don't hide it from people, but I keep a whole different life outside of my everyday life, since the rest of the world is issues with homosexuality. Yes, in a beloved community, I'm accepted for all of my parts of my gay society, and some of the people consider it average. A whole different part of my life is being pagan, not an average religion. I don't ever use the term normal because it does not exist. Even in this community, I'm still a bit different because I'm a druidic shaman, which is not very common, but accepted as different. I've mentioned each part of my life as a separate part, even within this beloved community of the UUs, because this is how I've had to live my life, each separate and each part of me together.
Hello, my name is Monica McNeil, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. During a time when so many are looking for community, what beloved community is to me was a very interesting question to be asked. Well, to be honest, I really hadn't taken the time to think about it until now. I mean, like most, I had heard it referenced in a poem or a speech or at church, but beyond that, I hadn't put much thought into it. And when I did, it was a bit humbling when I had to admit that I didn't know what beloved community was. Outside of the occasional feel-good story, I personally had not experienced beloved community. So, as I thought about it during the weeks that followed, pondering, thinking of what beloved community was to me, I had to face some truths. But first, I want to quickly go over what community is in and of itself before tackling what beloved community is and or looks like. Again, like many, I'm sure, when I think of community, I think of those around me, those I feel I share like-minded interests, thoughts, desires, and ideas with. Oxford Language breaks it down even more by defining community as a group of people living in the same place or having a particular characteristic in common, a feeling of fellowship with others as a result of sharing common attitudes, interests, and goals. But what if that's not the case? If community is what we have in common, what kind of community do you have if you're a community that came together celebrating those very differences? Does that mean kumbaya, never a problem to be had? I mean, don't get me wrong, we know most communities are comprised of people and their many differences within the overall shared interests. Thankfully, we're not pod people. I mean, at least I don't think the majority of us are. We understand that some of us are naturally quiet, maybe a little shy. Some are a bit louder, more easily heard. In general, we understand that there are many kinds of personalities with varying likes and diverse interests within every community. But again, what if your entire community is made up of people who look, think, behave, and act differently than you do? Can that community still be defined as a community? Within most communities that think and behave the same, having everything run smoothly can still be quite challenging. For example, before the pandemic, most of us probably drifted in and out of our various communities throughout the week, not giving them much thought, coming and going without regard to the maintenance required emotionally, mentally, and physically to sustain the very space and community we were a part of. And if we're really honest with ourselves, more of us than not would have to admit that when in these communities, we have at times found ourselves contributing in negative ways. For instance, giving that haphazard quick greeting, passing of words while rushing off to the next event, briefly asking someone how things are going, hoping to hear the short answer, or just settling into the old default of it being easier to talk to people who look and act the same as we do. Because let's face it, they fit within our preferred comfort zone. I had to look at myself. So, if this is community, what happens within communities with like-minded thinking and similar ideologies, then what is a community that's purposely built upon its differences? Well, I believe that a community built around its differences is definitely community. But it's also a beloved community. But what does beloved community mean? Due to being asked this question, as stated earlier, I looked around to gain a better understanding of this term and came to the conclusion that a beloved community is genuine concern and care for each other. It's reaching outside of ourselves, even when you might not feel like it. And that can be easier said than done at times. Beloved community is love in action. It's making lasting connections, thoughtful interactions, and intentional inclusion. It's reminding ourselves to be love, unity. However, I do believe that beloved community, as wonderful as it may sound, doesn't just happen through osmosis or by accident. It is purposeful hard work done with diligence by one another being vigilant within the community. I also believe that beloved community is and has to be fought for by those within the community. To me, beloved community is looking around and seeing people who look the complete opposite of you and saying hi, but not stopping there, but starting a friendship that could last a lifetime. It's going outside of your comfort zone to make sure someone else knows they are seen, knowing next time it may be you who feels invisible and someone's walking up to you to show you you're not. It's putting in the everyday work needed to be a better listener, to be a support if and when needed. It's being there to lift up others when they feel too tired to go on and need a helping hand. To me, beloved community is the community being loved, loving itself. Everyday love lived out through action, not just in the big ways, but also the little ways that can oftentimes, unbeknownst to us, help some help pull someone through to the next day. In a world that seems to be in constant turmoil, I personally believe for survival's sake, beloved community is a must. And so I asked myself, have I helped in nurturing an atmosphere of genuine, everyday, lived out love? I don't mean just volunteering from time to time. Not that that's not important. We all know it is. But nor do I mean spinning like a top to the point half the time you can't even think straight. Just plain old everyday lived out common love. Making going the extra mile a part of every mile of your day. You know, doing those things that take you out of your comfort zone, whether financially giving and or giving of your personal time. I believe beloved community is a sacrifice of one's own ego, self-centeredness, and sometimes, yes, desires in order to serve another within the community or the community as a whole. And so, yes, when I asked myself this question, I had to admit I definitely saw a lot of room for improvement. I believe that beloved community is just that, love and unity. And as many of you know, love can be hard. But that's what beloved community is. Putting in that work. The simple acts of doing for others what you would only want done for yourself. And it's knowing our community, our beloved community, is worth our love. Because we all deserve to be loved. Thank you.
What has come to me as a result of helping create this service is that people generally have the wrong vision of what beloved community is or should be. It is not a place where lions lie with lambs or where we are all in a nirvana state without conflict. Beloved community requires, as Mike noted, people to undo what is done to us as we grow so that we can remain in awe of all newness that comes into our world and keep the trust and faith in our own abilities and in each other. As he noted, in this culture, we are taught very carefully that to become an adult, we have to mistrust ourselves and each other. Michael illustrated how fragmented we often are in our lives because we are so far from beloved community. Monica showed us ways to build those bridges between us that can lead to beloved community. So what does this mean for us as a UU church? We strive toward beloved community, but we may be missing the fierceness it requires. Fiercely embracing difference, fiercely seeking discomfort to continue growth, fiercely opposing thought patterns that keep us from ourselves and each other. Fiercely trusting ourselves. To develop beloved community, we cannot strive simply for comfort and security, but rather for growth and celebration, embracing and respecting differences, not merely tolerating them, fiercely committing to each other and to the institution to grow our souls individually and collectively. To make that qualitative change, Dr. King told us about all those many years ago.